Welcome to the Soft Revolution. My name's Leo Kalian, and the idea this show's exploring is what softness looks like when it becomes a strategy instead of the apology. Today is episode 4. I want to start with a misconception, one I've heard so many times it stops sounding like words. This LGBTQ thing is all very new, isn't it? People really believe this. That queer people are a recent thing. They talk about us the way you talk about a phone update, like we arrived sometime after broadband, like there was a quiet little stretch of human history, fire, the wheel, agriculture, cathedrals, and then somewhere around 2011, between the smartphone and oat milk, someone installed us. I used to find that annoying. Now I mostly find it funny, because it's so confident and it's so wrong, and the confidence is the funniest part. So let me just say the true thing. It took me most of my life to be able to say this out loud and mean it. But we are not new. We are not a glitch in the present. We are one of the oldest continuous things about being a human being. Gay, lesbian, bi, trans, every shade of us. We go all the way down. As far back as the record goes, we're already in it, waving. Now, when I was a kid, I used to scan everything for some sign of myself. Films, songs, the people around me, history class. Never once did anyone point at a figure on the board and say, that one, they're like you, and they turned out fine. So I did the thing you do when the proof is missing. I decided I must be the exception, that whatever this was, it started with me, and it was probably a fault, and it was definitely brand new. I carried that with me quietly for years, and it's a heavy thing to carry. The belief that you're the first of your kind and there's no one ahead of you on the path, so there's no proof the path goes anywhere good. But I was wrong. That's the gift I wish someone had handed me back then. We are not the first of anything. There are as many ways to be us as there are people who have ever felt this, and every one of them has a long line standing behind it. We are the latest verse of a very old song, and once you've heard the whole song, nobody can make you feel small in quite the same way ever again. So, today isn't me complaining about the people who think we're new. Today, I'm just going to introduce you to the ones that came before, name by name, everyone they tried to leave out of the lesson. Let's start at the bottom, the oldest love story I can prove to you. And I mean prove, not a hint, not a maybe, not a poem you can squint at 2 ways. A tomb, 2 men. It's the one that tends to land hardest, and it goes like this. Straight love gets called history. Queer love gets called a theory. Because apparently, if archaeologists find a man and a woman buried together, everyone understands romance. But if they find 2 men nose to nose in ancient Egypt, suddenly the room needs a forensic team. At Saqqara in Egypt, there's a tomb for 2 men, Niachnum and Khnumhotep. They lived around 4,500 years ago. They worked in the pharaoh's palace as overseers of the royal manicurists. Yeah, the pharaoh had a glam squad. But when these 2 men died, they were buried together. Then you look at the walls of the tomb. They're standing chest to chest, arms around each other, noses touching. Now, in ancient Egyptian art, that kind of pose was how intimacy was shown. It was how couples were shown. Because there were 2 men, people started auditioning explanations. Maybe they're brothers. Maybe they're twins. When love is straight, evidence is enough. When love is queer, evidence has to beg for permission. They don't always erase us by burning the archive. Sometimes they erase us by making the obvious sound uncertain. But the stone is still there. Tenderness carved so carefully it outlived kingdoms. So when people say queer love is modern, I just think modern? No, we are not new. We are the receipt they forgot to bury properly. Just some food for thought. And I want you to really hold the timescale on that one. Because it's hard to feel 4,500 years as a real number. Those 2 men were buried before the Great Pyramid was a tourist site, before Greece, before Rome, before almost every empire you learn the names of in school. That's where we begin. Not at the edges of history, but at the foundation of it. And Egypt's not a fluke. Once you start looking, we are everywhere the record is thick enough to hold us. Go to the Greek island of Lesbos in the 600s before the Common Era, and you'll find a woman so famous for her poetry that for centuries, people didn't even use her name. They just called her the poetess, the way you'd say the Beatles and not have to explain. Her name was Sappho. She wrote in the first person to women about loving women, about the girl across the room who makes her tongue break and a thin flame run under her skin, about jealousy, about devotion. She performed it the way I'd recognize, to a lyre, a melody under the words, a tortoiseshell instrument in her hands, a singer-songwriter writing about loving women 26 centuries ago. And she wasn't hidden. She was canonical. The Great Library of Alexandria held 9 entire books of her work. 9. She was taught, quoted, carved onto coins. And here's how good she was. Her home island was Lesbos. Her name was Sappho. And both of these words, lesbian, sapphic, are still today how the world says women who love women. An entire orientation named twice over after one woman and the rock she stood on. When a girl in 2026 calls herself a lesbian, she's using a word that points like a long arm reaching back through the dark directly at a poet on a Greek island in 600 BCE. Of those 9 books, almost nothing survives now. Fragments, lines rescued from rubbish heaps in the wrappings of mummies, and yes, later people tried to tidy her up, to recast her as just a respectable schoolteacher who happened to live among women, but they were too late by about 1,000 years. You can't unname an entire kind of love once it's been named after you. The word outran the senses. It always does. And she did the exact thing I tried to do for a living. She put the feeling into a song, with an instrument in her hands, and sent it out past the edge of her own life. It worked so well that 26 centuries later, a girl who's never heard a note of Sappho's music still carries her name around as the truest word for who she is. That's the furthest a song has ever traveled. Not the charts, not the year it came out, just true enough to outlast every single person who'd have preferred it if she didn't exist. She pulled that off on a tortoiseshell lyre in a dialect almost nobody alive can read. Makes my job look easy. And it's not only poets, it's the people who ran the world and the people who fought for it. Because if you think 2 men in a tomb is the exception, wait till you meet the army. This is the other one I find myself telling people about. Usually the people who reckon queerness and strength don't belong in the same sentence. The most feared army in ancient Greece was 300 men dating each other. I'm not exaggerating. The sacred band of Thebes. 150 male couples, lovers, fighting side by side. And if you've never heard of them, that's not an accident. Someone decided you shouldn't know. We were taught queerness is new, soft, a modern thing with a flag and a hashtag. But those couples weren't scandalous. They were the strategy. Because a soldier might run from death, but he doesn't want to look weak in front of the person he loves. He wants to protect them. So Thebes built an entire military unit out of lovers. Devotion was the weapon, and it worked. They defeated the Spartans, the original shirtless warrior, emotionally constipated civilization, beaten by an army of gay couples. That's the part you were never meant to know. They want you to think queerness is fragility, but history proves otherwise. When they finally fell in 338 BCE, surrounded by Philip of Macedon and Alexander's army, they didn't beg. They died together, in formation. Archaeologists have found 254 bodies buried there, rows of bones, the receipt no empire could edit away. So next time someone tells you queer people are a modern invention, remember what was cut out of the story. The strongest soldiers in the ancient world were queer. We were never the weak ones in the story. We were the front line. Just some food for thought. And it gets better, because the story doesn't stop with the men who lost that battle. It carries on into the man who won it. And here's the part nobody put in my school books. That teenager on the other side, Alexander, the most famous conqueror who ever lived, the literal benchmark for masculine ambition, the great love of his life was a man, Hephaestion. They grew up together. When Hephaestion died, Alexander didn't grieve quietly. He refused to eat for days. He lay across the body. He cut off his own hair and laid it on the corpse, which is the exact gesture Achilles makes for Patroclus in the Iliad. And everyone watching knew precisely what it meant. He put an empire into mourning. Their old tutor, Aristotle, had once described the two of them as one soul living in 2 bodies. Historians still argue the label, lovers or the deepest of friends. Fine. The ancient sources are coy, the way they always go coy about us. But the boy who helped destroy the army of lovers loved a man so hard he nearly destroyed himself when that man died. The conqueror and the conquered were the same kind of person. They just let you remember one of them. And a few hundred years later, in Rome, It stops being a rumor and becomes architecture. The Emperor Hadrian, ruler of a world that ran from the north of England to the edge of the Middle East, loved a young man named Antinous. When Antinous drowned in the Nile, Hadrian didn't hide his grief. The ancient account says he wept like a woman, meant as an insult, and he did it anyway, in public, in front of everyone. Then he made his lover a god, an actual god, with temples and festivals and a priesthood. He founded a city on the Nile and named it after him. And he ordered statues, so many statues that today, nearly 2,000 years later, more images survive of this one young man, an emperor's male lover, than of almost any other person from the entire Roman world except the emperors themselves. Think about the scale of that. The most powerful man on earth loses the man he loves and answers by carving that love into marble and scattering it across 3 continents on purpose so it could never be unseen. That's not a man who thought his love was a shameful secret. That's a man building a monument too big for anyone who came later to quietly take down. They did try later, but there's still more surviving sculptures of Hadrian's boyfriend than of almost any Roman who ever lived. You do not win against a grief that builds on that scale. So sit with where we are in the story. 4,500 years of evidence, a couple in a tomb, a poet who named a whole orientation, an undefeated army of lovers, a conqueror in mourning, an emperor turning his grief into a religion. This is not a hidden footnote you have to squint at. For most of recorded history, queer love is just there, in the open, on the coins and the walls, treated by the people of the time as a fact of life rather than a scandal. Ancient Greece didn't think it had invented something shocking. These were not people sneaking around. These were people the rest of the world looked up to, which raises the obvious question. If we were always this visible, this celebrated, this woven into the record, why did so many of us grow up believing we were the first ones? Where did the silence come from? It came from somewhere specific, and it came late. It came mostly with the empires and the particular religions they carried in the hold, drawing hard new lines around who was allowed to love whom and writing those lines into law. And it came with the Victorians, who took one good look at the record they'd inherited and decided large parts of it needed a quiet trim before the children saw. The disapproval you might have absorbed as ancient and eternal is, in the scheme of things, fairly recent paint. It's younger than the tomb at Saqqara by about 4,000 years. That's worth holding on to. The shame is a new thing here, not us. We're the old thing. The shame is the recent arrival, the interruption, the phase the culture is going through. Now, I'm not going to pretend the road from there to here was clean, because this is the part where, for a stretch, people did try to take the monuments down. They couldn't delete us, so they did the next thing. They edited us. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? You know that line. Weddings, Valentine's cards. It's Shakespeare, Sonnet 18. And it was written to a man. The first 126 of Shakespeare's sonnets are all addressed to a beautiful young man scholars just call the fair youth. The Summer's Day one is his. And in 1640, a publisher named John Benson brought out an edition that quietly swapped the pronouns. He became she. And that doctored version stayed the standard version for about 140 years. Now, same trick, same century, different country. Michelangelo wrote around 30 love poems to a young man named Tommaso di Cavalieri. When his own grandnephew published them in 1623, he changed the he's to she's. That version stood as standard for nearly 250 years until a scholar put the real pronouns back in the 1890s. And sometimes it went further than editing. An Englishwoman named Anne Lister, born in 1791, kept a diary that ran to something like 4 million words, now treated as a national treasure. The parts about the women she loved, and she loved women her whole life, she wrote in a cipher she built herself out of Greek letters and algebra so that no one could read them over her shoulder. When a relative finally decoded them after her death, reading them, as it happens, alongside his own male partner, the advice in the room was to burn the lot. 26 volumes. They didn't. They hid them behind a wall instead, and Anne Lister's work survived. I'll be honest about why this stretch matters to me. Nobody ever told me the Summer's Day sonnet was for a man, and nobody ever mentioned Babur, the first Mughal emperor, the man who founded a dynasty that ran the Indian subcontinent for centuries. He kept a memoir, and in it, as a young man, he writes about a boy in a market named Barbary. He writes that he went lovesick for him, that he couldn't lift his eyes to meet him, that he wandered the lanes bareheaded and useless, undone by a feeling he had no defense against. An emperor put that in the official record in his own hand, and somehow it never made it into a single classroom I ever sat in. If one teacher had let those details stand, the sonnet, the emperor, any of it, I think I'd have spent a few less years assuming the feeling I had was a fault that began with me. That's what an edit costs, not just a record. The kid reading it, who needed the company and got handed an empty room. But the editors never understood the one thing that mattered. You can change a pronoun. You cannot change the fact. The man is still in the poem under the she. Sappho is still in the word every time someone says it. The lovers are still nose to nose on that wall, and they will be tomorrow. Every doctored edition is just a confession with a date on it. Somebody looked at the real thing, understood it completely, and got scared. They didn't manage to delete us. They only made us harder to find for a little while. And we got found anyway. We always get found. So let's say the thing plainly, because it's the thing under everything. The reason it can feel like we're new is that for a few centuries, some frightened people did real work to make us look rare. But rare on paper was always a lie. And the work failed. It is right now failing. Because you cannot permanently delete a thing that keeps being born. Every single generation, regardless of the law, regardless of the edited book, regardless of how thoroughly the last lot thought they'd handled it, more of us simply arrive, unbidden, on schedule, the way we always have. And it was never just one narrow kind of us. Women who love women, men who love men, yes, but also people who lived outside those two boxes entirely. People who moved through gender in ways their own cultures had names for and roles for and honor for long before the rest of the world decided there were only two doors and you had to pick one at birth. Empires kept ledgers. Desire never did. It kept showing up in every shape a human heart can hold, in every century, on every continent, and no amount of tidying ever got the edges to sit where the tidy people wanted them to. And this generation has something none of the others did. We can read the whole record now. The diaries are decoded and printed and sitting on shelves where any frightened kid can find them. For the first time in a very long time, a queer kid can look up and see the whole line behind them. It runs, unbroken, all the way back to a palace in Egypt and a poet on the island Lesbos. So let me say the part the whole episode has been walking toward. They erased us from the history books. They did not erase us from history. There's a difference, and it's everything. The people were always there. In the tomb, in the army, in the sonnet, in the diary. All the editing ever did was hide the page. And now the page is open. That's the thing they can never take again. They tried to delete us, and they had everything on their side. The empires, the churches, the school books, the centuries, and they lost. The love kept surfacing anyway, in the fragment, in the cipher, in the statues they couldn't smash fast enough. It turns out, it's easier to conquer the known world than to make two people in love stay buried. They will not erase us again. Not because we're lucky, but because it's no longer possible. The story is out, and it's ours, and we are the generation that gets to keep it that way. Which brings me to a song. I wrote a song called Together. On its face, it's just a love song. Two people in a car, the coast going past, the kind of night you don't want to end. But there's a turn in it, near the ending of the song, where it stops being about the good weather. And if the darkness ever comes to call, I'll stay beside you. And into darkness, if we slip or fall, together we pray. That's the whole of this, compressed into a couplet I wrote before I fully understood it, because that's what all of them did. The two men in the tomb, the soldiers in their pairs, the emperor and his god. They stayed beside each other when the darkness came to call, and it always came. The song isn't me inventing some private little romance. It's me describing the oldest formation there is. Two people refusing to fall separately. You are not at the start of this river. You are the part of it that's finally, loudly allowed to say so. So stand in it. Not because anyone gave you permission. The permission was never theirs to hand out. It was carved on a wall in Saqqara before they were born, and it's been yours the entire time. You were never the first. You were always the latest, and there will be more of us after you, reading the same story, standing a little taller, because you refused to be quiet. I hope that makes the song sound different.
Together we stay. Together we stay. See you pull up in your steel blue ride. Stormy eyed. Reach for my smokes as I head outside. Late at night, I say I'll pick the music if you first do drive. Roll the dice. Play all the hits, start with Diamond Line. You reply. Chasing the coast at the speed of light. Wind in our hair, thunder in our eyes. Feel like a bird in the open sky. Day and night, day and night. Together we stay. Darkness ever comes to go, I'll stay beside you, I'll stay beside you. And into darkness if we slip or fall. Together we pray.